Today we are going into a hidden, mysterious society that existed long ago, but not today. Or? Well, we don't really know what happened, but this is Pax Illuminaten, and this is based on what we know of the Illuminati. And in this game, you will portray as one of the top tier members of this secret society, trying to recruit new members. Now, what I have here in front of me is just a prototype. It is quite a well-made prototype, but some things might look a little bit different when you get the game. In this video, I will show you how to play this game, how to set it up, and what you can do during your gameplay. So just sit down there, take a cup of tea, coffee, whatever you like, and let's take a look at this pretty little game. We need to start with shuffling the Illuminati cards and put them face down on the table. Next we need to use those Illuminati cards to form the map. Now, depending on how many players you are, this map will look different. Next we need to create the court, and we will do that by drawing 5 faced up Illuminati cards and put them out on the table. And then we need to place the Chamberlain token on the leftmost cards in the court. Each player also gets 4 Illuminati cards to form their hand. And then we need to set up the favor pool. Here again, depending on how many players you are, there should be a different amount of favors. There are 6 different favors in this game, and we should sort them up according to their faction. Next to the favor pools, we have 4 bonus action cubes. Now each player gets an Areopagus card and their influence tokens corresponding to the color on their board. Next we need to deal out the contact cards to each player. These are shuffled and dealt out at random. Once we have received our contact card, we slide it in under our board. On this card, we can see our starting favors. These are the favors that we will start with at the start of the game. The player with the lowest number on their contact card is the starting player. Then you need to place out your Areopagus cards next to the map. And again, depending on how many players there are, you will of course place these differently. Next we need to create the event deck. First we need to split these up. The standard event and the edit event need to be separated. And then we shuffle both sets of cards separately. Once we have done this, we take 3 of the edit event and 3 of the special events. And then we shuffle these together. Now we need to do this one more time. The first pile is placed at the bottom and the second pile is placed on the top. And now you have formed the event deck. The event card not used are put back into the box. Next we need to put out the faction cards. Looking like this. We should shuffle the deck, and depending on how many players we are, we need to put out a certain amount of cards faced up on the table. This is a 3-player game, so we put out 4 faction cards faced up. The rest goes back into the box. Lastly, we at random need to put out 2 plot cards faced up on the table for all players to see. These are the objectives that we need to complete to be able to win the game. But each player in secret also get 1 plot card that might help them to win the game. So once we have done the setup, we are ready to start playing. And in Pax Illuminaten, you portray as an Areopagus. I am not sure about that pronouncement, so I'm sorry if I say it wrong. But you are basically one of the top members in the Illuminati. And you are trying to get more members into this formidable little secret group. To simply spread knowledge and, well, light into the society again. You will do this by using your little favors here, but also by using your little influence discs here out on the map itself. You will form little fractions, you will take over lodges and so on, but I will of course show you all of this during this video. Now, let's take a look at the different phases that you go through as a player. So this game plays out during a series of rounds, with each player taking their turn to the fullest and then moving on to the players on their left in clockwise order. The player's turn consists of 3 different phases, and the first phase is the event phase. So this here is an edit event called Profession. Now, when you draw these event cards, you need to resolve the text that stands in the bottom. And of course, if this is your first turn, you would not have any of these cards in front of you at all. And some turns you won't have it anyway, and then you would of course not do this step. But if you have an edit event card in front of you, you now need to do the following. You need to take one of the little favors that are on the edit card and return it to the supply. And then the active player gets to take one of these favors and put in their own supply. If there would not have been any more favors on the edit card, the event card would have been discarded. But in this case, we still have 4 favors on it, so it will stay here for now. But if you instead have a special event in front of you, like this one here, for example, the recruitment press, faced up in front of you on the table, meaning that you have played this in a previous turn, it would now be discarded. But if you have any special events on your hand, now it's the time to play them. And what you would do is you simply take that special event and you place it faced up in front of you. But now all players can use the effect on the cards during this round. Because remember, during your next active turn, you would discard that card. And you can only have one active special event at a time. Now that was the event phase. Quite easy, right? You simply check if you have any edit events and then you split out the little favors here. And then you check if you have any standard events. If you have, you discard them and then you may play a new one from your hand that all the players can use. Now the second phase of this game is the main action phase. And this is where you get to do, well, your main actions. And you can do 2 main actions out on the map. But you can also do as many scheme actions that you can, which is playing cards from your hand and place them out in front of you. But then we also have some claim faction actions, and I will tell you more about that in a little bit. First, let's take a look at what the main actions on our board is. The first action we're going to look at is the scout action. So scouting kind of represents you going out on the map trying to find new members that you can recruit. To do this, you first need to pay favors. And you need to pay favors that matches the active cards that you want to start from. Now, at the start of the game, this will be your starting active card. So you would need to pay one of the influences next to your Areopagus cards. Now we get to take one of the adjacent cards to our active cards and put it up on our hand. Now we get to look at this card and decide if we want to take that same card or another card. Once you have decided which card you would like to choose, you simply take that card and you put it out faced up on the map. The second action we're going to look at is influence. The influence action is where you get to spread your influence to recruit members to our little group. First, you need to find a card that you would like to influence. And it needs to be adjacent to one of your active cards that you have out on the map. Depending on which card you are trying to influence, they will cost different amount of favors. In this case here, we can see that this card here would cost us 1 green favor. So we pay this to the general supply, and then we would put our influence token on this card. So now we have influence over this card. And this is a part of our active cards out on the map. So during our next turn, we could start to take a look at cards that are next to this card here. And this is the way you can expand out on the map. As long as you have your influence on the card, you can interact with cards that are adjacent to that card. So if you want to put influence on the cards, you need to pay some favors. And depending on which rank the card has, there will be different amount of places to put your influence on, but also different costs. This one here, for example, can only have one influence. And here you can pay either a white influence or a yellow influence. And this one here, you would need to pay one yellow and one purple. But on this one here, you would need to pay one blue, one yellow, and one yellow or blue. This means that if this player here would like to place influence on these two spots, they would need to pay 2 blue and 2 orange favors. But now they have 2 influence on this card instead of 1. Next we have Expel. The Expel will let you remove any card out on the map that is adjacent to your card that have influence on them. So you need to choose one of your cards with influence to be the active card that you are using at the moment. And then you can choose to expel a card next to that active card and change it out with a card that you have on your hand. But you may not do this if a rival have their influence on the card that you want to expel. So to be able to expel this card here, for example, we would also first need to pay some favors. And we would pay 1 favor matching the active card per influence on the target card. If there is no influence on the target card, like in this case here, this action has a minimum cost of 1 favor. Meaning that we should pay 1 green favor in this case here. But if there would have been influences here, we would have needed to pay more green favors instead. Once we have paid the favors that we need to pay, we get to remove this card. And this card is now discarded. And now we get to choose a new card from our hand to place out on the now empty spot. If there would have been any of our influence tokens on the original cards, we would now move them over to the new card instead. In this case there were no influence, so nothing happens. But if there would have been, they would have popped up here now instead. And if we would have had too many influence tokens for the cards, meaning that there's not enough space on the card to put them on, well, those influence tokens would be put back to your supply. But at least we got a new card out, right? The fourth action here is to exhort. Now, when you exhort, you kind of use your influence to get favors back. Let me show you how we do that. To do an extortion, you need to target a card out on the map where you have at least 1 influence on. And now you get to take that card's favor value and get those favors. Meaning that if you extort this card, you would get 1 green and 1 yellow favor from the favor pool. But there is also a whisper rules when it comes to extortion. And that means that if the card that you are extorting has the same rank as another card adjacent to it, you get to take that favor as well. This means that if you choose to extort this card with rank 2, you would also get the favor from this card here because it has rank 2 and it is adjacent. And it needs to be your influence token on the cards with the same rank. And you can only extort from a specific card once per turn. Next action is to organize, meaning moving your influence out on the map. First we need to choose a faction where we have at least 1 influence. For example, here the red player have 1 influence on the magistrates. And then we need to pay 1 favor to the chosen faction. Each of these moves will let you move your influence token from 1 card to another card that has that faction symbol. And you could move up to 3 steps as long as the next card also have that faction symbol. Meaning that this player here could move over here all the way down to this free space here. If you have influence on several cards with this faction symbols, you could move several influences at once. You do not need to just move the same influence for these 3 moves, but you have a maximum of 3 moves. And then you're done. Any card that has a crown on can only have one player's influence tokens on it, and not several. You could move your influence token from one card with a certain type of favors to another type that does not have that type of favors, but in that case your movement is over. The last main action is oust. And oust is kind of like a duel, which means that now you need to find a white glove and smack your opponent. No, sorry, I got carried away. No, oust is where you are challenging another player in the game. To challenge one of your rivals in an oust, you first need to choose one of your cards to be the active card for this challenge. And of course you need to have influence on that card. Now this acting card can challenge one of your rival's cards into an oust. And you can challenge several influences on the same card if you want to. But you need to pay favor per influence that you are challenging. For each targeted influence, you need to pay one favor matching your acting card. Now first we need to determine the player's starting strength. The starting strength of each player is the number of influence tokens that they have adjacent to the targeted influence. And remember that influence on the same card as the targeted counts as adjacent. The player that has the highest amount of starting strength has an advantage, and the one that have the lower amount has a disadvantage. And now each player at the same time must reveal one card from their hand to add on a modifier on their starting strength. And you can see the modifier down here on the shield, which means that Franz here would give you a modifier with +3. If you have disadvantage and you play a card with this symbol here, you will automatically win. Otherwise it counts as 0. But if you have advantage and you play a card with this symbol here, then you would automatically win. Otherwise it would count as 0. But if both players accidentally trigger an automatic win, these cards will cancel each other out. And if we end up in a tie, the one that went into the challenge, meaning the active player, needs to decide if we want to press on the challenge, meaning that if we should draw and show one more card. If we choose not to do this, well, the oust will simply just stop like nothing happened. But if we choose to press the challenge, we would of course draw one more card, and then we would hopefully have a winner or a loser. If the defender wins, nothing actually happens. It will be like we just slapped each other on the cheeks and then we walk different directions. But if the attacker wins, well, then it's a little bit different. So if the attacker have won, the targeted player needs to remove their influence back to their supply. But the defender actually do get just a little thing. They can choose a favor from any of the factions that they would like to and place them in their supply. The attacker will actually gain a bonus follow-up action, meaning that they get to take one of these bonus action cubes and put on the targeted card. This bonus action does not count as one of the active player's 2 main action, but the bonus action here can only be used for influence, expel and organize actions. And the cards where the cubes are placed needs to be a part of those extra actions. So that was all the main actions on your board here. But you can also scheme, remember? And when you scheme, you actually play cards from your hand and you put them faced up in front of you. And there is no limit to how many times you can scheme during your turn. But the cards needs to have the right combination for you to be able to place a new card. So you can choose to scheme, and you will do that by playing cards in front of you from your hand. When you do that, you get to do whatever action that card says. Here, for example, you do not need to pay favors for any expel actions during your turn. But you can choose to play one more card. If the symbols up in the top left corner matches at least one, Here we have a blue favor, and on the new card we have a blue favor, which means that you can continue your scheme playing this card and do whatever that card says. And you can do that as many times as you want to, as long as at least one of the favor symbols matches the one that you had on the card before. Just remember that if you play a card with the crown symbol in the top left corner, this will end your scheme. And if you want to play a card with an ace in your scheme, it needs to be the first card in your scheme. But that's not it. You can actually claim one of the factions as well, if you control the biggest lodge out on the map. But what's a lodge, right? Well, let me show you. A lodge is a series of at least 3 cards adjacent to each other with the same favor symbol. So these 4 cards here are adjacent and they are now forming a lodge. And if you have the most influence in this lodge, you can take that faction card. Now if there is a tie for the biggest lodge, we would treat 2 lodges as one big lodge and then see who has the most influence. If there would still be a tie, well, nobody will get a faction cards. But if you manage to get one of these, you can actually use them in your gameplay. These faction cards have 2 different abilities. One that you can use once per turn, and one that is a passive effect. But this faction card might not be yours to keep forever, because if you lose the control over the lodge, meaning that somebody becomes the bigger influencer in that lodge, well, then you will lose the card. Or if the lodge might for some reason disappear and become smaller, well, then you would have to give this faction card back to the table. The very last action that you can choose to do is to claim one of the plot cards, either the ones that are faced out on the table or the one that you have on your hand, remember? Now, if you can complete whatever conditions the card says, you can take one of your influence tokens and put it on that plot card to show that now you have what it takes to complete this plot. A little tip is that you might want to keep this one a secret as long as possible. I mean, this here is open information, but they don't really know what you have going on here yet. And you don't need to claim this as soon as you fulfill whatever it says. You can do this in the very end. And remember that just because you fulfill this condition right now doesn't mean that you will fulfill it in 10-20 minutes, because the map might change, the influence might change, the board might look different within minutes. That is why you should keep the one that you have on your hand secret for as long as you want to, because the other players will probably want to rearrange the map a little bit and throw you away from the plot successing. So that was the main phase, where we do our actions. Once you have done your main actions, your scheming, and maybe claim some plots, we move into the check phase. And this is where we need to check some things. The first thing we need to check is that we still meet the conditions on the plot cards. If we don't, we need to remove our influence token right away. If a player has previously lost their claim to any plot, but now meet the conditions again, they can put their influence token back on that plot. But we also need to see if the active player have managed to get influence tokens on 2 plot cards. Because if they have, well, they win the game. Next we need to check the factions to see if anybody needs to give back one of the faction cards that they have in front of them, because, well, they do not have the most influence in that lodge, or maybe the lodge has completely gone away. Or if we should put back any card that only gave you the card temporarily due to an effect. Lastly, we need to do an event check. But before we draw event cards, we need to see if any aces or crowns were played during the game. If at least 1 crown or 1 ace was drawn during our turn, the active player gets to draw 2 event cards from the top of the event deck. Then they get to take a look at these cards and choose one to keep. The other one goes back on top of the event deck. If the event card was an edit event, we do whatever the card says right away. meaning that we should move all the white favors in this case to the supply, and then 6 of those favors to this edit card. And if it was a special event, the player gets to take this card to their hand and play it out at the start of their next turn. If 5 or more edit event cards are in the discard pile at the end of the current round, meaning that all players have an equal number of turns, then the game also ends. And now it's score based on the player's controls of the factions. The last step of a player's turn is to redraw. And the first thing we need to do is to get rid of all the cards that we have used in a scheme. They go into the discard pile. If you have more cards in your hand than your hand limit allows, well, you do not actually need to discard down. But you don't get to draw new cards either. Now all the non-active player from left to right, meaning clockwise order, draws cards up to their hand limit first. Then the active player draws back to their hand limit. You may draw 1 or 2 cards from the court, meaning the faced up cards. But if you draw 2 cards from the court, one of them needs to be the one where the Chamberlain is standing above. Plus, you must pay 1 favor of your choice. You may always draw from the deck if you want to do that instead. But in that case, you may not draw from the court after. But if you choose to first draw cards from the court and still haven't reached your hand limit, then you may draw the rest from the deck. If you have chosen to draw cards from the court, you would need to refill it afterwards. The card under the Chamberlain is always discarded if it hasn't been chosen. We would need to move the little Chamberlain 1 step to the right. If he's already at the rightmost position, it will simply go back to the start instead. And then we simply refill the market, going from left to right. And that, my friend, is how you play Pax Illuminaten. Each player doing their turn to the fullest. They can do 2 main action and then they can scheme how many times they want to. And your goal is to complete 2 of the plots. Either the one that you have on your hand or the 2 that are out on the table. And this game has a lot of strategy in it. This is really about you planning what your next move is out on the board. But also the other players messing up the map for you. I mean, if you see a player that is about to do a lodge, maybe they're about to get a faction card, maybe they are about to take over something that you want, you can really mess up their plan by going in, switching the cards, changing them for them, challenging them to a duel, and so on. There are a lot of things for the players to discover in PAX Illuminaten. That, my friend, was PAX Illuminaten from Ion Games. This game is not that hard to learn how to play. Where this game becomes a little bit difficult is that you have a lot of options during your gameplay. I mean, you have your main actions, but then you can also scheme by using your cards. You can do the different factions, try to get them in on board on you, and you also have the different plots. I mean, you have the plots out on the table, you have the plot on your hand. So there is a lot of strategy. And then I haven't even spoken about what's going on out on the map itself, which is really the main part of the game. And this is where this game becomes a little bit difficult to master, because there are a lot of things that you can do. And this is really one of those games where you become better and better and better the more you play it. There are not that much luck in this game, I would say. I mean, there is a lot of strategy in this game. So if you like strategy card games where you have a lot of options and a lot of replayability, you should check this out. And there is links down in descriptions if you want to know more. If you like what I'm doing here, if you like my channel, why not subscribe to it? Why not comment? Why not give me a thumbs up? Or just say hi in the comments. But most importantly, my friend, please keep on spreading that board gaming love I know you all have. Peace out.